Hello, thank you for coming to read with us today. Today we are going to be doing our MCAS reading practice, and today we're going to be doing the actual reading, okay? So before, you may have watched my video about the MCAS reading order strategy, and we went through and probably numbered our paper 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think we got to like 20 or 21. So this is actually this is one of the steps way in, like step 20, when we go to read the actual main text, okay? So I'm going to navigate to the MCAS practice website. And today's reading is going to come from grade 10, computer-based. And then you can enter your name and click start. And I'm going to jump ahead to these two passages between questions 13 and 14. So here we have two passages about algae and seaweed, and they make a paired text, right? That then has questions 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, right? Including question 22 with the composition question, okay? Now, I like to teach my students to do their reading on this page next to the composition question. So you can use this little toggle button to expand or collapse the reading, and you can use these tabs to switch between the two readings, okay? And what I love about this is it saves any notes that we take. So if I highlight that in pink where it says explains, if I go back to the previous page, explains is no longer highlighted in pink on any of the other questions. There, sorry, I clicked the wrong spot. So see what explains is no longer highlighted anywhere else, even on the original passage. So my pro tip is to do your reading of the main text here next to the composition one whenever possible. Okay. So here we go. I'm just going to basically read the main text of both of them in this video. So this gives you a chance to read along with a fluent reading, if that is helpful for you to sorry, my microphone, let me just have okay, my best microphone is back. Here we go. Let's see. This is the Zoom tool that I like, this red one. I go to the red laser pointer. Okay, here we go. Read the articles about algae and then answer the questions that follow. This article explains the many potential uses of algae. Can algae save the world? The earth is crying out for a hero. This natural resource may be the answer. Okay, so I hope you know what algae is at this point. Let's see. So I wish the text were a little bit bigger, but it won't do anything with the Zoom. Okay. So I hope I don't have to interrupt my reading to ask students in the room to disconnect from their phones. Here we go. It says, here we go, paragraph 1. According to recent data, the last decade was the warmest on record. If emissions continue to rise at their current rate, global warming is predicted to impact our agriculture and fisheries to the extent that 90% of the world's population will be subjected to losses of food production, meaning 7.2 billion people could be affected. Ecological grief is now emerging as a condition, the emotional anguish suffered by scientists whose day-to-day work entails persistent reminders of exactly how much our planet is losing, from species and habitats to time itself. Calling Captain Planet, we need some swift assistance, someone or something to swoop in and eliminate our carbon emissions. Pow! Sort out our food shortages and water scarcity issues. Wham! And work out how on earth we eradicate plastic pollution. Zap! Enter some little green organisms. Algae, proof that heroes really do come in many forms. What is algae? The plural form of alga, algae, refer to a large and varied group of aquatic organisms. They might be single-celled and microscopic, called microalgae, or multicellular, such as seaweeds like kelp, macroalgae. Once considered plants, taxonomists are now turning away from this classification. As Charles Green, professor of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at Cornell University, explains, their genetic makeup genome is very different, indicating that they are not closely related to plants. In fact, algae are protists, a completely different kingdom. These differences are multifarious, and many of them visible to the naked eye. Algae, for example, don't have roots, nor leaves, nor flowers, but there are some similarities with plants, namely the ability to perform one of the most important functions in the world, photosynthesis. For those struggling to recall those primary school biology lessons, photosynthesis is a chemical reaction that occurs inside plants and organisms after they take in sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. The purpose of this is to create glucose from which they can acquire energy to live. However, a useful byproduct for the animal kingdom, at least, is oxygen, O2. In summary, through photosynthesis, algae and plants remove CO2 from the atmosphere, and there's a fair amount of it in there, thanks to us and our machines, while gifting the world O2 in exchange. Algae have been in existence for hundreds of millennia. In fact, red algae fossils recently discovered in Chitrakoot, India, are believed to date back an estimated 1.6 billion years. Yet, in spite of their impressive lineage, which predates both plants and animals, many hold the plant kingdom responsible for the oxygenated air we breathe. Who hasn't heard, for example, the Amazon referred to as, quote, the lungs of the world, producer of 20% of the world's oxygen, end quote. But this is in fact incorrect. For all its extraordinary qualities, and there are many, like the fact it absorbs roughly 2 billion tons of CO2, carbon dioxide each year, making it a bona fide global warming warrior, the rainforest's actual net contribution to the planet's oxygen supply is believed to be roughly zero. We love plants and we need them, but most of the world's oxygen comes from algae, and it has been accumulating in the atmosphere because of them for millions of years. Through photosynthesis, marine microalgae account for most of the primary production of living biomass in the ocean, and nearly half of the photosynthesizing biomass produced on the planet, Professor Green explains. Sorry. In case you're wondering, land plants make up the remainder. Since oxygen is given off during photosynthesis, he continues, this means that, on average, approximately every other oxygen molecule we breathe in has been produced by marine microalgae. Even more importantly, he adds, it was the ancestors of these modern-day marine microalgae that produced the oxygen that led to the oxidizing atmosphere that supports most modern-day life as we know it. It's as simple as that. The majority of life on Earth depends on algae. Yet, as remarkable as this fact is, it barely scratches the surface of how heroic these organisms could turn out to be. Algae as fuel, as food, as freshwater preservers. One of the many awe-inspiring things about algae, Professor Green explains, is that they can grow between 10 and 100 times faster than land plants. In view of this speedy growth rate, combined with the fact they can thrive virtually anywhere in the right conditions, growing marine microalgae could provide a variety of solutions to some of the world's most pressing problems. Take global warming. Algae sequesters CO2, as we have learned, but owing to the fact they grow faster than land plants, can cover wider areas, and can be utilized in bioreactors, they can actually absorb CO2 more effectively than land plants. AI company Hypergiant Industries, for instance, says their algae bioreactor was 400 times more efficient at taking in CO2 than trees. Now, just remember, as you're reading here, if you have a word that you want to highlight, right? If you want to highlight this word, right, and you want to look that up in your dictionary, I would say mark it with a highlighter so you remember where it was in the text. Okay, here we go. Paragraph 17 is a short one. Imagine the possibilities here. Too many to fathom, although one idea is to start positioning algae plants next to factories powered by fossil fuels, so the CO2 can be taken out of the atmosphere as it is emitted. Of course, it's important to note that growing algae on an industrial scale for any purpose would have its own environmental impact. Algae would need fertilizer to grow, a lot of it, and plenty of electricity too. And where will that come from? Fossil fuels? We don't yet have all the answers. There is another way in which algae could help in the battle against global warming, and that's as algal biofuel. When extracted, algae oil can be used to create a more environmentally friendly version of fossil fuel, biodiesel. Other parts of the organism can be used to make other types of fuel as well, like ethanol, and believe it or not, even jet fuel. Algal biofuels are currently in development. While progress has slowed in recent years, a joint research program between ExxonMobil and Synthetic Genomics Incorporated recently predicted that by 2025, they will produce 10,000 barrels of algal biofuel each day. Clearly, there is promise in this field. Yet perhaps even more excitingly is what algae, marine microalgae specifically, could do to eradicate world hunger. According to Professor Green, it has the potential to provide all of the protein necessary to feed a global population approaching 10 billion people. Algae have a much more diverse assemblage of amino acids in their proteins than terrestrial plants, and many essential nutrients that don't occur in plants, he explains. Hence, algae can be a lot more nutritious than many of the plant-based items we put in our diet, such as soy. Already used in food supplements like omega-3 fats, EPA, and DHA, algae are currently being developed into snacks and protein powders and are likely to be served up as meat and seafood substitutes in the not too distant future as well. Also, algae can replace many of the dairy products we currently consume, Green adds, and it is at least, if not more nutritious, certainly more digestible. And it's not just their nutritional credentials which could solve humanity's looming food crisis, but how they are produced. Marine microalgae grow in seawater, which means they do not rely on arable land or fresh water, both of which are limited supply. Professor Green believes the use of these organisms could therefore release almost 3 billion square kilometers of cropland for reforestation, and also conserve 1/5 of global freshwater consumption. Hero with a dark side. Yet, for all algae's awesome potential, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. In recent years, a worrying trend has emerged in certain parts of the world: the rise of harmful algal blooms, HABs. Algal blooms refer to aquatic systems which have become saturated with too much of one particular species of algae, turning waters blue, green, brown, or red. Although some remain worryingly invisible, they become classified as HABs when they start to turn toxic. This can occur for multiple reasons. Although scientists believe climate change, with more CO2 for algae to feed off and warmer temperatures to hasten growth, in certain farming practices, like when fertilizer containing nitrogen and phosphorus, aka algae food, runs off fields into fresh water, lie behind the surge. In 2019, 150 incidents of HABs around the world were listed on the Harmful Algal Information Database. There were 315 listed in 2018 and 367 the year before that. Exposure to HABs can cause a wide range of symptoms, and these will depend on the algae species in question. But contamination from blue-green algal bloom, a common bloom in the UK last year, can cause everything from rashes and eye irritation to vomiting and fever. In the case of wildlife, livestock, and pets, it can even cause death. Put simply, HABs are dangerous, and their existence serves as a stark reminder that we cannot take this precious species for granted. Algae can take in our carbon emissions, yes, but too much and our treasured friend becomes toxic. Can algae save the world? That algae is largely responsible for providing us oxygen and absorbing our CO2, you might say it is already saving the world. The question is, can it continue to? Experts appear to be positive. Algae are the real Green New Deal, says Professor Green, providing a resource that has the potential to solve many of society's greatest challenges during the 21st century. Okay, and then here we see the citation of where this came from. Can algae save the world? From The Face, January 17th, 2020. Okay, so that is our first text. And now we've read the first one, Can Algae Save the World? We're going to navigate to the second one, The Ocean Farmers. Okay. I am curious to see here. Okay. In this text here, in addition to the helpful pieces that we know well, right? The instructions, the purpose setting statement, the title, and the author, there are lots of other helpful text features, such as this picture. We can see algae, and there are some headings that are super helpful. So in this section, what is algae, right? The topic of this is probably pretty obvious. Same with here. I'm going to highlight this one in blue as well. This topic heading is very helpful. Algae as fuel, as food, as freshwater preservers. There's another picture. Here we go. Hero with a dark side. That's heading is a good part to show the negatives of algae, their quote dark side. And then last, we sort of have this conclusion section where it answers the question, can algae save the world? Okay, so when we navigate to the second text, The Ocean Farmers, I'm going to review these text features again. So the instructions here say, read the articles about algae and then answer the questions that follow. The purpose setting statement says, this article describes the unlikely but growing popularity of seaweed. And then here it says, The Ocean Farmers Trying to Save the World with Seaweed by Melissa Godin. Okay, so we've got a picture here as a text feature. Then this one is organized into longer paragraphs. Here there is, in a diagram and a caption. Okay, there's a heading here. It says, the climate economy is wind at our back. Those of you that read the questions, right, are probably remembering that, right? That this section here, wind at our back, is directly from one of the questions that we already previewed. So we definitely want to pay special attention in that section. And then let's review the diagram as well. So the caption says, pathways for sequestration of macroalgae carbon in the deep sea. Okay, kelp takes up CO2 via photosynthesis. Plant detritus floats out to sea. Exported dissolved carbon travels to the deep sea. Plant detritus sinks. Carbon is sequestered in the deep sea. Okay. Here we go. Paragraph 1. In a cove in Bamfield, a coastal community in British Columbia, Canada, Louis Droul steers his boat, the Kelp Express, a mile along the mountainous coastline. For 51 years, this boat has taken Droul to the fortuitously named Kelp Bay, where beneath the water's surface, ropes of seaweed that Droul has been carefully harvesting for decades dangle in the cold Pacific water. Referred to by some as the, quote, seaweed guru, end quote, by others as the, quote, kelp grandfather, end quote, Droul, 84, was the first commercial seaweed operator in North America when he began growing kelp, a brown seaweed, in 1982. Seaweed is his life. He has studied it, farmed it, cooked it, and written an award-winning, best-selling book about it. Over the years, Droul has watched interest in seaweed come and go. But now, as climate change wreaks havoc on ecosystems across the planet, the world is turning to seaweed as a potential climate change solution. All of a sudden, people have discovered seaweed, Droul's tell me. They've discovered us. Let me center paragraph 3. I will read this section. Seaweed can play a huge role in fighting climate change by absorbing carbon emissions, regenerating marine ecosystems, creating biofuel and renewable plastics, as well as generating marine protein. Until recently, this centuries-old industry has mainly farmed seaweed for food in Asia, with China as the world's biggest producer of seaweed, accounting for 60% of global volume. But over the past decade, global seaweed production has doubled, with an estimated value of $59.61 billion in 2019, as interest in seaweed as a food source, carbon sink option, and renewable product from consumers, farmers, researchers, and business leaders blossoms. The coast of British Columbia, where Droul has spent his adult life, is a hotspot for seaweed biodiversity, and yet the industry here is only just taking off. A seaweed industry could bring jobs to the area. Could this remote, seaweed-rich corner of the world turn seaweed into climate solutions for the future? Droul is optimistic. I think we're going to pull it off. Sorry, I got a little bit distracted here. Students in the room, right? I'm doing this for your benefit that you can watch this whenever you're awake, but you all told me you're looking at your papers now, right? If you prefer not to read with me, I suppose you're welcome to read on your own. Okay, we're in the second reading, The Ocean Farmers, paragraph 4. While forests have long been considered the best natural defense in the battle against climate change, researchers have found that seaweed is in fact the most effective natural way of absorbing carbon emissions from the atmosphere. Unlike tree planting, seaweed does not require fresh water or fertilizers and grows at a much faster rate than trees, expanding by up to 2 feet a day. But seaweed's biggest comparative advantage is that it does not compete for demands on land. When we're planting trees, we need to make sure it does not take away that land from food production, says Katie Lebling, a researcher with the World Resources Institute's carbon removal team, which studies how best to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. But that is not an issue with seaweed. Seaweed can also help reduce greenhouse gas emissions in other ways. Adding a small amount of Asparagopsis taxiformis, a red algal species, to cattle feed has the potential to reduce methane production from beef cattle by up to 99%. Given concerns about the environmental impact of eating seaweed, seaweed, which itself is a source of protein, could be an eco-friendly and nutrient-packed food source in the coming years. Ronald Osinga of the Wageningen University in the Netherlands found that growing sea vegetable farms totaling 180,000 square kilometers, roughly the size of Washington state, could produce enough protein for the entire world. When you look at how we are going to feed the world population by 2050 in a way that doesn't harm the environment, there is only one pathway, says Carlos Duarte, a researcher and professor in biological oceanography and marine ecology, to scale up seaweed farming. Okay, so just as an aside, right? Now, as I'm reading here too, like I'm making these connections between the two articles. They both, for example, here in paragraph 4, they both talk about why algae is better than trees, right? So one of the good things about algae is it's better than trees. It's more efficient, and it gives some reasons. So that could be something that goes into your letter advocating for this farming. It's better than trees because they talk about using land for food, right? When we're planting trees, we need to make sure it doesn't take land away from food. Okay, so that's one of the benefits of algae. We saw that over here in Algae Saving the World too. Okay, right, so that's here in in paragraph 16. There's good, right? More effectively than land plants, it absorbs CO2. And there's also both have information about it as food. We see that here about how we're going to be eating algae. Can you believe that, kids? It's talking about 2050, right? That's 27 years from now. When you're 45 years old, you won't be eating meat anymore. No more beef, no more chicken, algae. I think that's something to look forward to. How old will I be in 2050? 65, right? No, is that right? Yeah, 65. So when I'm 65, instead of eating meat and hamburgers, I'll be eating kelp and seaweed. Oh, I can't wait for that. I should start now, get used to it. Okay, so here we go. Paragraph 7, under the heading, "The climate economy is wind at our back." Here we go. Since 2014, seaweed has increasingly been in the spotlight as a solution for climate change due to its ability to offset carbon, be a sustainable food source, and its regenerative properties for ocean ecosystems. Over the past 5 years, several academic articles have been published about seaweed as a climate change solution, and various seaweed cultivation projects have popped up around the world. From Saudi Arabia to New Hampshire, seaweed farmers and researchers are experimenting with seaweed cattle feed, biofuel, and bioplastics. While the industry for these projects is still in its infancy, many are optimistic about its future. "The climate economy is wind at our back," says Bren Smith, the executive director of Greenwave, an ocean farming company. "The ocean is coming The tide is rising. We can either run and hide and build seawalls, or we can turn around and embrace the sea as a climate change solution. Yet, there remain questions about whether seaweed can be scaled globally as a carbon offsetting strategy to combat climate change. The gains from seaweed sequestering CO2 can be reversed if it is not used correctly. If seaweed is just grown for the purpose of absorbing carbon without being harvested, it will rot and release the CO2 it has captured back into the atmosphere. Researchers say that there are two possibilities: sinking the seaweed into the deep sea or using it for products ranging from food to biofuel. But these options are not straightforward. Technology to sink seaweed is unlikely to be cost effective, and the process of transporting, drying, and converting seaweed into food, biofuel, and bioplastics itself emits CO2. Seaweed has a range of applications beyond carbon storage that can be a part of the solution, says Hallie Froelich, an assistant professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara, who researches the scalability of seaweed farming. But it's certainly not a silver bullet. Growing seaweed on a global scale has ecological risks. Too much seaweed could impact the amount of light that goes down to other species, affecting photosynthesis processes, and could have dangerous effects on ecosystems by removing too many nutrients from wild ecosystems. For the industry to scale, Druhl says, governing bodies, both national and international, as well as private companies, have to make major investments to help the industry get its feet off the ground. But currently, many governments in the Western world have yet to sufficiently invest in the industry or create the necessary conditions for it to scale. In some countries like the United States and Australia, it is easier to receive a government concession for oil and gas than it is for cultivating seaweed for biofuel. In many Western countries, permits for growing seaweed are hard to come by, and internationally, all the global mechanisms that could regulate seaweed farming were developed before the industry was created, leaving gaps in regulation and permitting. Seaweed is not an industry in most Western nations, says Duarte. It's a thought. But this thought, somewhere between a pipe dream and an inevitability, has captivated Druhl for half a century. It's always been kelp, he tells me, noting that he has always been fascinated by kelp's many uses. Druhl thinks seaweed has a role to play. The industry, he says, could provide meaningful green jobs to people who have recently become unemployed. Currently, Druhl is trying to convince his own daughter to join him in Kelp Bay. I keep telling her, we've got nice kelp business out here. But even if Druhl's daughter is not interested in joining the family business, there is a long line of prospective seaweed farmers waiting to learn from the kelp grandfather. Okay, so here it says, The Ocean Farmers Trying to Save the World with Seaweed by Melissa Godin from Time, right? So that's from Time Magazine, September 4th, 2020. Okay, so we spent time reading aloud these to you. I hope that you can use these videos so that you can hear a fluent reading of these two texts, right? And you can use them to answer both the composition question, right? And the multiple choice questions about this these paired texts. And remember, just to remember, this is from the 2023 grade 10 MCAS exam, and it's these two passages here after question 13 before question 14. So thank you for reading with me today, and good luck on your MCAS exam.